October 26, 1940. At the edge of Muroc Dry Lake in California, the desert wind kicked dust across the runway as test pilot Vance Breese climbed into an unpainted prototype marked NNA-73X. When he opened the throttle, the Allison engine roared and the aircraft leapt from the ground. Observers watching that morning could not have known they were seeing the birth of a legend. A fighter that would one day escort bombers to Berlin and turn the skies of Europe silver with freedom. The story of the P-51 Mustang began months earlier in a rush of desperation and ingenuity. In the summer of 1940, the Royal Air Force was fighting for its life. Britain needed modern fighters immediately, but its own factories were already stretched, building Hurricanes and Spitfires. The British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation, hoping the company might build Curtiss P-40s under license. Company President James H. Kindleberger countered with an audacious promise. Give us the contract and we'll design you a brand new fighter from the ground up in 120 days. The British agreed. Engineers Edgar Schmued and Raymond Rice sketched through the nights, shaping an airframe around a new low-drag, laminar flow wing, a revolutionary design that reduced turbulence and gave the aircraft its sleek, knife-edge profile. By late October, the prototype was ready. The first flight proved the machine was strong, fast, and remarkably stable. Early tests showed speeds exceeding 380 miles per hour at low altitude. Superb for a first effort. Yet the heart of the aircraft, the Allison IV-1710, gasped for air above 15,000 feet. The plane could sprint but not soar. For bomber escort work, altitude was life, and the Allison-powered Mustang seemed destined to stay below the fight. Still, the British saw potential. Its range, visibility, and aerodynamics were unmatched, so they took a bold gamble. They would fit it with a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same two-stage supercharged engine that powered their Spitfire Mark 9. In the autumn of 1942, the converted prototype, known as the Mustang X, flew for the first time over Hucknall Aerodrome. It wasn't just good, it was magnificent. Test pilot Ronald Shepard recorded speeds over 430 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, with climb rates rivaling any fighter in the world. Word of the transformation raced across the Atlantic. The U.S. Army Air Forces ordered the engine built under license by Packard Motor Car Company in Detroit. The marriage of American airframe and British power plant produced something transcendent. A machine that could outclimb, outturn, and outrange almost everything that flew. Its first Packard Merlin variant, the P-51B, would soon roll from assembly lines in Inglewood and Dallas. In its growl lay the voice of Allied air power to come. A deep, resonant rumble that promised the tide of the air war was about to change. The Mustang's legend was no accident. It was born of necessity, forged by collaboration and baptized in innovation. The Allies needed a miracle, and in a hangar in California, they built one. Winter 1943. Over Europe, the air war had become a war of attrition. Every daylight raid the 8th Air Force sent toward the Reich came home bleeding. B-17 limping on one engine, gaps in formation where friends had been. The enemy owned the high sky. Above 20,000 feet, the Luftwaffe ruled, and the Allies had nothing that could stay with the bombers all the way in and out. The Thunderbolt was fast but thirsty. The Lightning ranged far but demanded delicate care in Europe's cold. The Mustangs, waiting in Britain, still wore Allison engines, brilliant below the clouds, helpless above them. Then, in late '43, the first Packard-built Merlin by 16503 engines arrived from Detroit. Crews swapped them into brand-new airframes rolling out of North American's Inglewood and Dallas lines. When the first P-51 B-1 thundered down the runway, it felt as if someone had taken the sleek frame of a racehorse and finally given it lungs. At 30,000 feet, it could top 437 miles per hour, fast enough to meet a Messerschmitt head-on and climb away smiling. What made the marriage miraculous wasn't only power, it was endurance. With two 75 or 108-gallon drop tanks, the Mustang could now escort bombers for nearly 1,600 miles. For the first time in the war, the 8th Air Force could plan a mission to Berlin and back with fighter cover from takeoff to touchdown. It was freedom measured in octane. Pilots transitioning from the heavier P-47 were stunned. The Mustang handled like a dancer, light on the stick, crisp in a dive, perfectly balanced in a roll. Its laminar flow wing cut drag to the bone. The cockpit sat high under a crystal clear canopy, giving the pilot the sense of wearing the airplane rather than sitting in it. Even its hum felt different, a smooth Merlin tenor instead of the blunt growl of a radial. Men began calling it the Cadillac of the skies. In the chill of English mornings, new groups received their machines, olive drab or bare metal Mustangs, lined wingtip to wingtip, frost steaming off their noses as ground crews warmed the Merlins. The first to take them into combat was the 354th Fighter Group, soon nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group. Operating from Boxted, they flew deep into occupied Europe before most had even memorized their radio codes. By January 1944, their kill tallies proved what test pilots already knew. The marriage worked. The Luftwaffe, once the Hunter, was beginning to bleed. Back home, factories ran night and day. Each Mustang that left the line was faster, cleaner, more lethal than the last. Engineers tuned boost pressures, added K-14 gun sights, refined cockpit heating for high-altitude comfort. Every improvement whispered the same promise. This one will get you there and bring you back. The Merlin marriage was more than a technical success. It was an alliance within an alliance. British design genius and American industry fused into a single roar that echoed from the fens of Cambridgeshire to the plains of Kansas. It was proof that cooperation could build miracles. And as those miracles formed up over the Channel, the German war machine began to look skyward with something new. Fear. Winter gives way to 1944. And across Britain's frozen airfields a new sound begins to rise. The smooth, confident hum of hundreds of Merlin engines warming in the dawn. Pilots strap in with coffee still steaming in their hands. Mechanics wave them off into low cloud. Somewhere east across the Channel, Germany waits, and with it the hardest sky war ever fought. For years, the Luftwaffe had dictated the terms of battle. Their fighters struck the bombers and disappeared, untouchable, beyond the reach of Allied escort. But the arrival of the P-51 changed the playbook. Now the hunters would have to look over their shoulders. By February 1944, entire groups had converted to the new Mustang. The 4th Fighter Group, made up of former Eagle Squadron volunteers, joined the 354th and 357th, and soon the air above France shimmered with silver wings. When the call came to begin Operation Argument, the big week, in late February, the Mustang was ready. For 6 brutal days, the 8th Air Force bombed Germany's aircraft factories, while Mustangs and Thunderbolts tangled with the Reich's best. In the cold blue thinness above Brunswick and Regensburg, the Luftwaffe lost hundreds of irreplaceable machines and, more crucially, pilots who had no equals waiting in training. Those who flew the Mustang spoke of it as a living thing. It would slip through a dive smoother than silk, then claw back up as if pulled by invisible hands. At 30,000 feet, where the air was thin and icy, the Merlin still sang, a steady, confident note that told a pilot he could fight and win. They discovered that the Mustang could not only outclimb and outdive a Messerschmitt Bf 109, it could also stay aloft for hours, outlasting both pilot and prey. What began as bomber escort quickly became aerial dominance. Bomber crews noticed first. Where once their defensive rings of fire were all they had, now sleek Mustangs moved among them like guardian angels. Over the interphone, you could hear relief in every voice. Little friends in sight. The phrase became ritual, a signal that maybe, just maybe, they'd live to see another morning. Each sortie forged the Mustang's legend further. Its pilots returned to bases littered with punctured fuselages and empty oxygen bottles, but their confidence hardened into something elemental. They learned to press their advantage, diving on German airfields, rail yards, even truck convoys, cutting the arteries that fed Hitler's war machine. The P-51 wasn't just defending bombers anymore. It was bleeding the Reich white from the sky down. The cost was high. Many young Americans never made it home, their names later etched in aluminum across the very planes that replaced them. But each sacrifice tempered the weapon they were forging. By spring 1944, the 8th Air Force no longer spoke of if they could reach Berlin, only when. And when that day came, it would be Mustangs leading the charge. Forged from British design, American steel, and the will of men barely old enough to drink, the P-51 had become the sword that would open the path to liberation. The sky itself was shifting color, from the grey of fear to the silver of hope. March 4th, 1944. England's dawn is cold and grey, the kind that clings to bone. On the tarmac at Bottisham and Leiston, the new silver Mustangs sit in silence, drop tanks glinting pale in the early light. Pilots move quietly, helmets under their arms, cigarettes half burned. The mission brief is clear: Berlin. For the first time in the war, American bombers will strike at the heart of Hitler's empire in daylight. And this time, they won't go alone. The Luftwaffe had long promised any daylight attack on Berlin would be suicidal. Until now, they've been right, but the P-51 changed the arithmetic. With the new V-1650-7 Merlins and 108-gallon paper drop tanks, the Mustangs could reach the capital and still fight home. As the engines roared to life that morning, the air over East Anglia trembled with a sound that hadn't been heard before, a fleet of escorts ready to go the distance. The first formations crossed the Dutch coast just after 10 a.m. By the time the bomber stream reached Magdeburg, radar screens across Germany lit up like Christmas. From airfields near Hanover, Brunswick and Wittenberg, the Luftwaffe scrambled everything that could fly. Messerschmitt Bf 109Gs, Focke-Wulf 190As, veterans, rookies, anything with fuel. They rose to meet the bombers, expecting easy prey. But this time, when they dove, Mustangs were waiting. The 304th 57th Fighter Group, led by Colonel Thomas Hayes, broke high cover and tore into the attackers. Within minutes, contrails twisted into chaos. White scars scrawled across the blue. Lieutenant Chuck Yeager, flying Glamorous Glen, downed an FW-190 before it even reached the bombers. Nearby, Don Gentile of the 4th Group carved through a swarm of Messerschmitts, scoring multiple kills, before heading home with half his ammo gone and a grin plastered on his face. That day, American bombers reached Berlin. Bombs fell on the Erkner ball-bearing plant and the Spandau Works, the industrial heart of Germany's war effort. The Luftwaffe fought with fury, but by day's end, over 70 German fighters had been lost. The Allies had cracked open the door that Hitler swore was impregnable. For the men who flew those missions, the psychological shift was enormous. The unspoken fear that haunted every bomber crew, no one will be there when the fighters turn back, was gone. The Mustangs had carried them home. For the first time, the 8th Air Force owned the air above the Reich. But the road to Berlin came at a price. Many pilots didn't return. The mission cost nearly 70 bombers and several Mustangs. When the survivors landed that evening, their aircraft were peppered with holes, engines coughing smoke, hands trembling from exhaustion. Yet when General Jimmy Doolittle visited the squadrons days later, he looked them in the eyes and said, "Gentlemen, we have the Luftwaffe's number." From that point forward, the Germans could no longer recover. The Reich's skies were no longer safe, and its myth of invincibility had been shattered by the steady growl of the Mustang.